This videotape is the combination of home movies that I took with my 8mm movie camera as far back as 1939. And I believe that the reproduction from that length of time is still rather good.
Hello. My father, George Case Jr., played Major League Baseball from 1937 through 1947 for both the Washington Senators and the Cleveland Indians. He was a 5-time Major League base-stealing champion and 6 times led the American League in stolen bases. My dad was a member of 4 All-Star teams and had a lifetime batting average of .282. These highlights of my father's Major League career will serve as a framework for the baseball scenes you're about to see. The years prior to and during World War II were some of the most difficult and yet most interesting times in the history of Major League Baseball. All of the Major League teams were constantly being stripped of their stars due to the war effort. My dad was a home movie buff. During this time, he took 8mm film, which served as a historical record of Major League Baseball behind the scenes, but more importantly, the footage was shot in full color. The program you're about to watch is a glimpse of Major League Baseball in the 30s and 40s through the eyes of a big leaguer. Not only are these scenes historic, but they have a special significance in the fact that my father had the foresight to provide the narration for the scenes that you're about to see. Now let's go back to Griffith Stadium, 1939, opening day.
You see the President of the United States, Franklin Roosevelt, entering the ballpark, Griffith Stadium, 1939. The stands are filled by this time. Opening day was always a big day, of course, in Washington. It's the United States Army Band that was to supply the music for the opening day ceremonies. Joe McCarthy of the Yankees, Bucky Harris, Vice President Wallace, and Mr. Griffith marching in front of the band to the flagpole for the raising of the flag. The Washington Ball Club always opened one day before any of the National or American League teams. That was a courtesy accorded to Washington Ball Club because it was in the nation's capital. Now here are the dignitaries, Harris and McCarthy and Vice President Mr. Griffith coming back. There's President Roosevelt with his aide, General Watson, about ready to throw out the first ball. And there is the ball that he threw. Arnold Anderson, one of our pitchers, retrieved it. This is shot in our locker room in Griffith Stadium, weighing in of Joe Louis and Buddy Bear for their championship fight. Joe Louis dressed in my locker and asked me if I had an old bat around, which I, of course, gladly gave him one of my bats, and I was thrilled to do so. You fight buffs might remember that Buddy Bear gave Joe Louis a real good fight for 6 rounds in this championship fight. That's Mike Jacobs, the promoter. Now, these are headshots of people on the 1939 ball club. That's Ossie Bluegee, our coach. Later a manager of the Washington club, great infielder in his day. Jake Early, catcher. Rick Farrell, catcher, recently elected to the Hall of Fame last year. Benny Bengal, one of our coaches. Buddy Meyer, second baseman, great infielder, American League's leading hitter in 1936. That's Jimmy Pofall, shortstop. We acquired this young fella from the Minneapolis Ball Club during the winter months. Cecil Travis, our regular shortstop, one of the best that ever put a bat in his hand. The year that Williams hit 406, Cecil Travis hit 350. You didn't hear of him. It's Mike Martin, our trainer. Johnny Cato, bat boy. Johnny later went to Catholic University and had a fine intercollegiate career. Ken Chase, a left-handed pitcher. Bucky Harris, looking over Griffith Stadium from the cooler end of the Washington dugout. Nick Altrock, one of our coaches, clown prince of baseball, along with Al Shack. They had a comedy act for a good many years. That's Sammy West, one of our outfielders. Sammy had a little age on him here on his way out. This George Case when he was young and innocent, fancy-free. Johnny Willie, outfielder. Joe Haynes, the right-handed pitcher. Joe Kirkoskas, left-handed pitcher. Joe and I came up in the minor leagues together. Jimmy Bloodworth, second baseman. Now this was during the All-Star break in 1939. We had 3 off days, and you always worked out the middle day. Some of the fellows in the pepper game. We used to play pepper ball by the hour because you use everything in playing this game you do in baseball in a regular game. They don't do it much anymore. That's Clyde Milan, one of our coaches, hitting ground balls to Zeke Benora during an infield workout. Now this is the opening day in 1940. We're playing the Boston Red Sox in this opener. This is before the crowds arrived, the early batting practice for our pitching staff. And this is a skit being performed for Fox Movie Tone News with Benny Bengal and Nick Altrock as the actors. And it was a cold opening day. This was in the early 40s. The temperature was in the low 40s, and it was cold. And the reason I mention that, you'll see a little bit later. This is Nick with the red and Benny with the black. And the Fox Movie Tone News cameraman is directing this as this skit progresses. And this was shown to movie houses all over the country 4 or 5 days later. And it really turned out well because, of course, it was edited. But everybody got a tremendous kick out of this. That's the reason I mentioned it was cold, because that is real soap, and Benny half froze to death. Whoops. It really went over well in the theaters. Now the cameramen and newspaper people are waiting for the arrival of the president. The stands have filled. Jim Ritchie and his ground crew are manicuring a field. That's Vice President Wallace in the hat and Vice President Garner and Mrs. Garner in the gray. And that's the Red Sox. And they will come over and line up alongside of us on the right field foul line. And the president's limousine will go through us, waves to the crowd. The president was a very important factor, of course, in wartime baseball continuing, because a lot of people wanted us to quit. But he and Mr. Griffith got together, and as long as baseball players that were eligible went into service, baseball continued, and those that weren't eligible all had wartime jobs during the winter season. That's looking at our dugout. This is Charlie Gelbert. We acquired Charlie from the St. Louis Cardinals. Now we're down in Orlando, Florida at our spring training base at Tinker Field. That's Clyde Milan, one of our coaches, Walter Masterson. This field is still being used by the Minnesota Twins, but of course it's been built up and it's beautifully appointed now. It's Buddy Lewis, one of my real good friends, a long period. Lovell Dean, pitcher. Sid Hudson, one of my ex-roommates. Jake Early, catcher. He called that equipment the tools of ignorance, and that has stayed with all catchers for a long time, the nickname for that equipment. Bucky Harris, one of the best managers that ever managed a big league ball club. Paul Gearman, a pitcher. This is Jimmy Wasdell. We got Jimmy from the Brooklyn Club. Joe Kokoskis. Jerry Walker. We got Jerry from the Detroit Club. He was the most popular player ever to put on a Detroit uniform there. Dutch Leonard, one of our 4 knuckleball pitchers. Can you believe 4 knuckleball pitchers on one pitching staff? Ken Chase, left-handed pitcher. Jimmy Pofall. This boy, as I say, we acquired from the Minneapolis Club during the winter. Jimmy Bloodworth, Benny Bengaw, Buddy Meyer, Joe Haynes, right-handed pitcher, married Thelma Griffith, boss's daughter. That's Rick Farrell. Nick Altrock, that's Freddie Baxter, clubhouse man in the back. We're getting off the bus here in Daytona Beach playing Brooklyn, an exhibition game. And you people that are familiar with Florida in the wintertime know that at times Daytona is very cold and very windy in the spring. And this day was that kind of a day. It was cold and it was windy. These are sand sharks. They were catching off the pier there in Daytona the day that we played. We had 2 or 3 hours to kill before we went to the park, so we visited the pier and saw the sights. That's right along Daytona. Cars still, of course, go back and forth on the beach. See the way this fisherman is dressed? That's a sand shark. This is Florida. Coat, Mackinac. Now we're back at the Wardman Park Hotel in Washington, D.C. After spring training, before our season started, we always stopped at this hotel just before the opening of the season. We played the Baltimore ball game in Baltimore, and then we'd come back and play Baltimore in Washington, and then the next day the season would open. This is one of the truly great hotels in America, and it still is, but I think the name has changed now to the Sheraton. Beautiful place. Anybody that was anybody at one time passed through the lobby of this hotel. Congressmen, ambassadors, foreign dignitaries, business people. We're back in Florida at the Dubsdread Country Club. Every spring training we had one scheduled off day, and that was our golf tournament for the players. We all look forward to this. This is Buddy Lewis, a left-hander. First time that Buddy ever played in a tournament, and he had a heck of a time. He lost all kind of golf balls, and he even hit a ball in the pro's house. The pro's house was right on the fairway. But later, Buddy became a very fine golfer and was his club champion in Gastonia, North Carolina for 3 or 4 times. The Angel Hotel was our headquarters in Orlando. It wasn't a very pretentious place at the time. This is at our facility, the Tinker Field in Orlando, batting practice during spring training. Jerry Walker, this fellow is number 18, hitting. Number 1 is Buddy Meyer. Good hitter. Number 7, Jimmy Bloodworth. After Jimmy got out of baseball, he bought a shrimp boat. He was a shrimp fisherman in Pensacola, Florida. That's Jimmy Pofall hitting now. Number 7. Number 2 is Buddy Lewis. Good hitter. Outstanding war record. He was a pilot in a DC-3 for 4 years during the war. Some of his experiences were unbelievable. He came back with his hair white. Number 8 is Rick Farrell, Hall of Famer. Rick always claimed he was the best eighth hitter in baseball, and I believe it. That fella pitching right there was a big bookie in Washington. He booked baseball, football, basketball, numbers. Can you imagine him throwing batting practice to a modern-day big league club? We didn't think anything about it. That's not him now. That's Joe Haynes pitching now. Buddy Lewis. This is Johnny Wheeli hitting, number 24. Notice the backstop. Old-fashioned backstop, but we never got hurt. We protected ourselves. This is Charlie Gilbert hitting. Left-hander is Jimmy Wasdell. Number 11 is Ken Chase, pitcher. This is Cecil Travis. Great hitting shortstop. One of the best I've ever seen. Beautiful stroke. Hit the ball to all fields. Got his feet frozen in the Battle of the Bulge during the war, and that knocked automatically 3 years off of his baseball career. A lot of people just don't realize the sacrifices that professional baseball players made as far as their jobs were concerned. Bob Feller, Williams, 4 or 5 on our club, Lewis, Travis, Stan Spence. They cut some of the most productive years off of their baseball careers. St. Louis, Missouri, at Sportsman's Park, at Slick Kaufman walking across. Johnny Bernardino, number 4, from General Hospital. Johnny made a lot of money, even when he was playing ball as an extra during the winter months, and of course he's been a millionaire since. That's Bob Kennedy, George McQuinn. This is Freddie Huffman, our coach. Rip Radcliffe, outfielder. Old Sportsman's Park in St. Louis. Don Hefner. Bob Harris, pitcher. This park is no longer in existence. Busch Stadium is taking its place. Now, this is a contest we had prior to one of our games to try to draw some extra people. Barrel throwing contest. 4 fellas from each club participated, trying to get the ball in the barrel for a $100 war bond. Number 9 is Jimmy Bloodworth. Number 32 is Al Evans, a catcher. He hit it. I think he won it. Pretty sure he did. Al was a pretty accurate thrower. Number 7 is Jimmy Pofall. 26, Benny Bengal. Benny, take off your hat. You'll throw a little bit more accurately. There you go. Almost. This is Bernardino. Johnny was a nice guy. Another contest. 4 players from each team took off their shoes. They piled them in home plate. They went back to second base. They came into the home, tried to find their shoes, and got back to whoever got back to second base first was the recipient of a $100 war bond. I'm quite sure that Eldon Walker won this thing because he had the biggest feet, so his shoes were easily identifiable. That's Buddy Lewis trying to put on his shoes at home plate. They threw the shoes all over the park. Now we're in Fenway Park, and that's Ted Williams, the greatest hitter that I ever saw. That's Jimmy Fox on the right, Lefty Grove on the left. Now there's 3 Hall of Famers right in a row. This is the 4th one. Joe Cronin, 4 Hall of Famers right in a row. Joe was the manager and shortstop at that time of the Red Sox. This is their batting practice. Dominic DiMaggio. Roger Kramer was later a roommate of mine. Number 8. Lives in Manahawkin, New Jersey yet. Great duck hunter. And coon hunter. Ted Williams. This guy was unbelievable, unbelievable. He said, Casey, if I had your feet and you had my bat, they'd never get us out. That's Jimmy Fox. That's number 3. Nicest guy to ever put on a baseball uniform. This is Joe Cronin hitting now, number 4. Bobby Doerr. Now this is another Hall of Famer, so that's 5 on one ball club. Can you believe it? The 1940 Red Sox. 5 Hall of Famers. Jim Tabor, third baseman. Number 5. Gene DeSautel's catcher. Number 2, this is Lou Finney. Another good outfielder, Fenway Park, there's the Green Monster. I like to hit in this park. All right-handed hitters did, of course. Now we're getting off the train here in Chicago at the Englewood Station. This is about 6:30 in the morning, or the start of a western trip. At that time, we came west with 2 of our own Pullman cars, our own diner. Very, very commodious accommodations. Beautiful. I like it much better than traveling in an airplane. Food on the old-fashioned diners was excellent, just excellent. Fleet of cabs to take us to our hotel out on the lake, Del Prado Hotel on Lake Michigan. It's overlooking the lake from my window, hotel window. All American League players loved this place because the accommodations were excellent, the food was excellent, and Sam Langford, the owner of the ball club, loved baseball players. This is Comiskey Park, one of the really pretty parks in the American League. Taft Wright, outfielder with the Sox. He was also a roommate of mine a little later. We acquired him. Jack Knott, relief pitcher. Mike Tresh, whose boy was a shortstop for the Yankees for 2 years. Edgar Smith, left-handed pitcher from Columbus, New Jersey. Ed is still living in Columbus. That's Clint Brown, relief pitcher. Mule Has, one of their coaches, and a great outfielder when he played. This is Jackie Hayes with the first headgear ever worn by an American League player. Jackie had been hit in the head several times, and I'm sorry to say later on he went blind and had to have a seeing eye dog. That's Charlie Grimm with a hat on. That's Monty Stratton, who had his leg shot off the year before this picture was taken. The Stratton story with Jimmy Stewart was a result of that accident. And here's Monty pitching with that wooden leg. His right leg was shot off below the knee. He tried to pitch after that, and it just didn't work out. He couldn't get off the mound. Number 38 is Muddy Rule, one of their coaches. Mike Povich, walking across towards me. That's Luke Apley, the best hitting shortstop, average-wise, that ever played the game. Everybody loved Luke. This is Larry Rosenthal, one of their outfielders. Now we're in the clubhouse at Briggs Stadium in Detroit, about to play Detroit a doubleheader. That's Joe Krakowski's fixing his athlete's foot up. Tommy Bridges on the left and Del Baker on the right, the manager, Del Baker. Bridges just pointed at me. He said, I'm going to hit you in the feet the next time I face you. That's Harold Newhouser, left-handed pitcher. He'll be in the Hall of Fame, Harold Newhouser. That's Dizzy Trout, right-handed pitcher. His boy is still playing. That's Pete Fox on the left, Bridges and Del Baker. This is Barney McCuskey, outfielder, no good one. Number 7 is Dick Bartell. Now this is McCuskey hitting. This is Charlie Gehringer, the greatest second baseman of all time. Number 2, the Mechanical Man. Charlie was on his way out. They still played about 2 years after this, but he was a marvel. Hank Greenberg, Hall of Famer. So Gehringer and Greenberg, there's 2 Hall of Famers in a row with this ball club. Number 5. Now this is Rudy York, about 90% Choctaw Indian. Powerful man, just powerful, and a very, very humble guy, though. Everybody loved Rudy York. This is Frank Higgins, third baseman. Later managed the Red Sox for a few years. Good player. Number 6. Pete Fox, outfielder, number 8. Pete gripped the bat so tight that when you shook hands with him, you shook hands with a callus. It was unbelievable how tight he gripped the bat. But I'd like to do that. Briggs Stadium. This was a hitter's ballpark and still is because the background was always excellent and the high stands prevented the wind from being a factor. Good park to hit in. This is Bertie Tebbetts, their #1 catcher at the time. #1. Schoolboy Rowe, 6'6" pitcher, one of the best hitting pitchers that ever lived. He and Wes Farrell and Charlie Ruffing and Jim Tobin were the 4 top hitting pitchers that ever played the game. They weren't automatically outs. They were good hitters. Now we're back in the Detroit clubhouse between games. That's Rick Farrell drinking the milk, Buddy Meyer drinking the Coca-Cola, Ossie Bougie talking to Buddy Meyer. Both of those fellows have passed away. That's George Case. I was right at the height of my game here. Buddy Meyer. Dutch Leonard, one of my really good true friends. Benny Bengal. Benny showing the boys what to do when they get into service, because at this time the players were starting to be called up. And Benny was showing them a rifle drill that he said, you're going to have to go through. Cleveland Stadium in Cleveland on Lake Erie. At this time, this ballpark was only used for 14 night games a year and on special occasions. Huge park. And this is the natural park. Now they have a fence inside this playing area. But at this time, if you hit a ball at a certain part in this park, you could run for 2 hours before you caught up with it. Joe Gordon, #5. This was a really wonderful Yankee baseball team. That's Red Rolfe, #2. After Red got out of baseball, he was the athletic director at Dartmouth for a long time. Charlie Keller, #9. He and DiMaggio and Tommy Henry was a pretty good outfield. Boy, this guy could hit. Oof. Joe DiMaggio. Wonderful, wonderful player. Certainly one of the best that ever put on a uniform. #5. Joe always had a purpose in batting practice. He didn't try to hit the ball out of the park. He tried to make contact and get his timing down. That's Lefty Gomez throwing batting practice to another Hall of Famer. So there's 2 Hall of Famers in a row. This is the 3rd Hall of Famer in a row, Bill Dickey. Gomez throwing to Dickey. This is Babe Dahlgren, who took Lou Gehrig's place when Gehrig was forced to retire because of that terrible illness. This is Frank Crosetti, #1, the captain of the Yankees. My race with Jesse Owens in Cleveland Stadium. It was a good race. Of course, Jesse beat me, as well he should. He's the best that ever lived, probably. But I gave him a good race, and it was an honest race. I had my sinuses drained that morning at the Crowell Clinic in Cleveland, and I couldn't hardly breathe, but I went through with the race, and I gave him a good run. He's the only man that ever beat me in a baseball uniform. I'm not bragging, but it's the truth. I beat a lot of players in my day running against them. This is Jackie Price performing prior to a game. He used to catch balls in a Jeep. Bill Veck hired him and Max Patkin as part of our coaching staff. And this fella was unbelievable what he could do in that Jeep. Stand on his head, he'd catch balls in the Jeep, standing on his head. Regardless of where the ball was hit, he'd exhilarate that doggone thing and catch the ball. He was unbelievable. He had a lot of other gimmicks, of course. This was a day they had for Lefty Wiseman in Cleveland. They gave him a lot of kitchen paraphernalia and Yatsuyama on the island of Shikoku in Japan. I spent 2 weeks with this club, Japanese spring training, the first American player to ever do this, an American baseball representative. The year I managed Hawaii, and they asked me to go to Japan for a couple of weeks. It was a fascinating experience. This is a huge stadium on the island of Shikoku, and this is a little thing that they had that I brought back with me. And it's being used throughout these training camps now, that little exercise with the coach throwing the ball and the guy hitting against the screen. This is Jim Marshall, the only American on the ball club at the time. He later managed the Chicago Cubs. And it was cold. Every day we started out in spring training here, it was in the 50s, and I'm glad I had my insulated underwear with me. This is Jim Marshall. This machine, the Japanese batting practice machine, was not a good one, not nearly as good as our American machines. Now the players are leaving their locker room in the morning, about ready to start another spring training day, and their spring training day was brutal. They went for 8 or 9 steady hours, never a dull moment. Our American players could never put up with it, some of the stuff that they went through. But they survived, and incidentally, their spring training started in January, not in late February or March like we do. Now, the Japanese players are on their way for their calisthenics. They formed a huge circle with the instructor in the middle, and it was very wonderful to see because their exercises were all leaning towards stretching every muscle that you would use in baseball, and they devoted a lot of time to it. That's the coaching staff. Number 51 with our back to us was the infield coach, guy on the left, outfield coach, and a former bomber pilot during Pearl Harbor. And he didn't like Americans very well. This little gimmick, leapfrog, they wound up their calisthenics by going around that entire circle, leapfrogging over everybody else, and it was very impressive. And a very worthwhile exercise, really. This is the area for their infielders. The infield coach would hit balls at least a half an hour to each player on his right and on his left.
The portion of the program you have just seen completes my father's narration of the events during his time as a Major League ball player. The footage you are now watching was discovered shortly after his passing. These historic scenes are from the 1945 opening day ceremonies in Washington, D.C. This is President Harry S. Truman throwing out the first ball following the death of President Franklin D. Roosevelt. The torch has been passed to the next generation. As a postscript, on October 22, 1989, my dad was inducted into the Washington, D.C. Hall of Stars. The ceremonies were conducted at Robert F. Kennedy Memorial Stadium with Baseball Hall of Fame sports writer Shirley Povich of the Washington Post making the presentation.
For me to be here at the induction of one of my heroes, George Case. I'd like to tell you of my first memories of George Case. They're still quite vivid. He was to become the fellow to be known as the fastest player in Major League Baseball. He was to lead the American League in stolen bases 6 times. George Case created an expectancy simply by taking a lead off first base. And the question there in the fans' minds at Griffith Stadium, would he go or wouldn't he go? And so very often he went and he stole that base. He was a graceful base runner. None of that scrambling and flailing of arms that you see in so many base stealers. George Case sort of glided down the base path. I like to remember, too, that in a match race with Gil Cohn, Case ran the 100 in 10 seconds flat. And you may compare that with Jesse Owens' record time of 9.2 in track shorts and track shoes, and George Case running in that flannel uniform and baseball spikes. It was certainly the definitive event of George's great speed. I like to remember, too, that once in a conversation with Hap Hardell, the great track coach at Georgetown University, who was there to admire George Case's speed, said to me after the race, "I'd like to put him in a track suit and running shoes, and you'd have an Olympic gold medalist." That was George Case. And it's good to see him inducted into the Washington Hall of Stars. I'd like to say George Case belongs, and in Cooperstown too.
George, would you care to make a remark or two?
I'd like to just say thank you very much to the Hall of Stars and everyone here. It means an awful lot to the Case family, and especially, I must tell you that my dad was informed of this honor before he passed away, and it was a great personal thrill for him to think that the people of Washington, D.C. really recognized and remembered him after so many years. He loved this city. His career was a great one, and I wanted to personally thank Shirley Povich for the kind words over the years and this morning. We have a lot of very pleasant memories of this city, and I'd just like to recognize a minute some very important people. Following the presentation, my father's name plaque was unveiled during the halftime of a sold-out Washington Redskins football game.
I hope you fans have enjoyed this video of baseball during the 30s and 40s. This end of my dad's career really is where it began in Washington, D.C. It's been a labor of love for me, and I know it was a labor of love for my dad to be a Major League ball player and to be in this great stadium. To see him honored like this is a great thrill for our family. We thank all of you for your interest.
I hope you enjoyed this glimpse of Major League Baseball during the most critical time in our nation's history. My dad, who passed away on January 23, 1989, loved the game, and his career in baseball spanned more than 50 years as a player, coach, manager, scout, and minor league batting instructor. I'd like to think of this video as his gift to all of us who also love this greatest game of all.